Hey everyone, here's a slightly more in-depth tutorial on how to replace textures for Gran Turismo 4, though this will also work for pretty much any other PS2 game. After a bit of experimenting, I found out that making your own custom textures, like icons, car liveries, and backgrounds is actually very easy, but I do have a few tips for it. All you really need is to run the game on an emulator. I use PCSX2 in this case, as well as any kind of image editing app that you're familiar with that allows you to set a transparency level. I personally use Inkscape for this, but there are probably better apps out there as well, and I'll leave the top suggestions from you guys in a pinned comment. Once it's all sorted out, the next step is to find the textures you want to replace. This either involves dumping the textures by enabling the setting in your emulator and loading the things you want to replace, or find an existing texture replacement and try to find the textures in there. The latter can sometimes be like trying to find a needle in a haystack, so if you still want to dump your textures, you can disable the loading of texture replacements to still get what you need. Once that's all sorted out, turn off the texture dumping, or else you may unknowingly dump thousands of textures you don't need, and copy the textures you want to replace to another folder. Now open up your preferred imaging editing app, load the textures you would like to replace, and off you go. This is where my process in modifying the textures splits into two versions. First off, the easy one. For any flat textures like icons and event banners, all you really need to make sure is to keep the dimensions and orientation of the image the same, so upscaling by increasing the resolution for example is therefore totally fine. You also need to make your replacement a little bit transparent, and at least make it similar enough to the original texture, as this can sometimes create some funny artifacts if not done properly. Once you're satisfied with your result, export the replacement using the same name as the original one, then go to your emulator's texture replacements folder, which in PCSX2 is located next to the one for all the dumps, add the replacements, preferably in a named subfolder so you can easily find these again later, and reload your textures. And that's it! You have now successfully replaced a texture in Gran Turismo 4, and this method works exactly the same in other games. If the texture doesn't seem to change, however, it may be that there's already a replacement with an identical or near identical name. In order to properly replace it, simply search for the texture name in the replacements folder and locate the other one, then move it out of the replacements folder to ensure it only loads the one you want. Modifying the car textures, however, is a bit more difficult and in some cases, painfully limiting. To curb your expectations already, pretty much all of Gran Turismo 4's cars have mirrored textures for the main body parts, so any text or icons will be mirrored on the other side unless the car already has textures for a livery that you can modify, but if it doesn't, anything asymmetrical for the front and rear bumper is completely impossible. Also, while some textures can be quite obvious in their mapping, there are quite a few examples where it really becomes a case of trial and error. Some textures may look the exact same but can cover completely different parts of the car, or some are also for things like shading and reflection, so you really have to pick the correct textures. I usually like to label them for this reason, and if you want to know what a certain texture corresponds to, a simple but effective tactic is to put it in front of a color that really stands out, like hot pink or nuclear green, then see what that replacement does to the car. Anyway, once you've found the right texture, there are a few ways you can go around modifying it. What I personally do in Inkscape is that I group the textures I want to add to the car, then use the car's base texture as a mask to let it kind of stamp onto the things I want to add, so it still follows the car's shading and panel gaps. In order to make it more visible, you can then duplicate the edit texture a few times, but not too many, as this can mess with the shading again. And just like before, once you're satisfied, export it with the correct name, put it in a recognizable spot in the replacements folder, and you're done. One thing to know with this method, however, is that it only replaces the textures for cars at the highest level of detail. If the car gets too far away from the camera, and especially if an opponent is driving it, the lower LOD loads in, which can make the replacements pop in and out of existence. If you want to fix that, you would also have to repeat the process for these textures, but in most cases, I would say that just doing it for the highest LOD should suffice. These are essentially the basics of how you can replace the textures in Gran Turismo 4, and by extension, any PS2 game you can run on the PCSX2 emulator. If you have any questions or tips, feel free to let me know in the comments or on my Discord server, and any new findings will be added in a pinned comment for this video. But with that being said, I hope you found this tutorial helpful, and if so, make sure to like the video and subscribe to whatever this second channel of mine has become by now. Anyway, thanks for watching, and as always, have a great day.